So Baldur's Gate 3. It's finally here. It took 20 years, but yes, the third installment of the game has just launched into Steam's early access. Now, I sat down and spent most of the day yesterday playing this game and actually got a lot further than I expected. Early on, I was looking at this thing thinking, yeah, I like fantasy stuff. I'm vaguely interested, but I had some concerns about whether or not I would enjoy the turn-based combat or what appeared to be a super heavy emphasis on the storytelling, the dialogue. A lot of times, those aren't the kind of games that are in my wheelhouse, but I have to say, after my first day of playing, I'm in. I'm still in, and I'm going to continue to go through. So I want to take you through how I feel about the game so far, some of the major things that have stood out to me. But I think before we get started, there are two important things to keep in mind. First of all, this is just an early access game. It is only the first act, which they have said is roughly 20 to 25 hours. It's not complete. Not all of the classes are in the game. Not all of the origin characters are in the game. There's still plenty of bugs and things for them to work out. And the second thing I want you to consider is that this is just a first impressions video. I'm kind of going to give you what my thoughts are after a day of playing, but this isn't like a full-on review or anything. So just consider that. I mean, it's in the title. It's first impressions. So here are my first impressions. I want to start off just going through the experience and what I've seen and played through. So it starts, of course, with character creation. You get to pick your origin, which includes the sex, background, and name of your character. Then you get to choose the race as well as subrace if one is available. And some of these subraces, well, all of the races have their own specific like specialties and stuff. Some of them even get their very own cantrips or spells. A fair bit of appearance customization as well, choosing between different types of faces, hairstyles, eye colors. You can pick tattoos, as well as I believe there were 6 total voices that you could choose from. And then of course there is the class. There are 6 of those in the game at the moment. And along with the classes, you get to do some customization of specifically the types of cantrips and spells that you want to have active on your character. And then you get to also take a look at and choose some options within skill proficiency, as well as your abilities or attribute points. Now I ended up going with, it was a human cleric. I liked like the holy spell kind of thing. I wanted to basically be just like Shadowheart. She's one of the origin characters, and I thought she looks so badass. After encountering her in the game though, and getting to know her a little bit more, she's kind of just an ass, period. At least what I've seen so far. I'm sure she's got some deep understory, you know what I mean? So the game starts off with your character having been abducted and held captive on this mind flayer tentacle ship. The ship is going around and like destroying this town and abducting more people within it, as well as some of the additional origin characters that you'll discover throughout the adventure. And then the ship is under attack. We get some goblin wyverns or dragons coming in. They're blowing this thing up. You teleport dimensions. Basically, eventually the ship is in such disarray that you're able to break free from your cell. And this is where the actual gameplay tutorial experience begins. They take you through all of the basics of movement, world interaction, combat. You're introduced to a few characters and the dialogue trees. You have to make some fairly important decisions. Going through the ship, fighting off these different brain creatures, these little demonic things, and it all wrapped up with you at the hull of the ship trying to basically bring the thing down so that you could get yourself off of it. And that whole experience took actually about an hour, which I thought was a really nice introduction to what is supposed to be like this immersive RPG. And then also I have to say, before we move any further, I am not super intimately familiar with Dungeons and Dragons. I haven't played the actual physical game where you sit down with your friends, you make up your characters, and you use your brain to go through these fantastic experiences. And I've only dabbled in a handful of different D&D related games. Like I played that Neverwinter MMO, and that's the only one that actually comes to mind. So I'm not the biggest Dungeons and Dragons person. I've just always appreciated it from the outside. And this being my first introduction to like the world of D&D and Baldur's Gate specifically, I've enjoyed what I've seen so far. I think they've got this they've really set up this really interesting world with Baldur's Gate 3 that's actually pulled me in. And yeah, it got me to sit through and listen to and care about the dialogue, stories, and cutscenes, which is not typically the case for me. I have to tell you, I usually don't have the patience or care to sit through any of that stuff. But yeah, the tutorial took about an hour. Eventually, the ship that we're on is crashed. We are washed up on this beach that is a couple hundred miles away from Baldur's Gate. And now the real story and the real adventure begins. What happened? Well, I got up on the beach. I walked around a little bit. I found some chests to loot, some washed up fishermen and stuff. There was a love letter on this one dude. And eventually I encounter my first origin character, who is Shadowheart. You would have seen this introduction if you looked at any of the early gameplay footage that the developer put out for Baldur's Gate 3. She's introduced to me, and I eventually decide, you know what, join my party. And I think that's one of the neat things. Every one of the origin characters that we've been introduced to so far in my first day of playing, you get to pick if you want them in your party. Besides whatever my personal desire would be to have these particular characters in my party, I've just thought in general, it's better to have more people than less people to fight with. Those are more spells to use, more health pools that have to get worked through, more angles for you to attack from. So Shadowheart immediately joins my party, even though she's given me a bit of sass. I take Shadowheart and my cleric character. We are the cleric duo, and we make our way through the ruins of the crashed ship, and I thought this was really neat as well. They didn't just say, hey, your ship crashed and here you are on the beach. The ship is right there. The ship that you crashed out of is just next to you on the beach. So me and Shadowheart make our way through. There are some remnants of enemies remaining for us to fight, and we eventually wind up this mountainside into this area of these abandoned ruins, and what looked to be a bunch of looters or something trying to get into the ruins to get some secret artifact or whatever. Instead of just walking up and asking them what they were doing, I of course did the sensible thing and pushed one of their team members off of a ledge, which immediately engaged the very first fight. And this was like the first legitimately difficult encounter, and I think this was a great introduction for me to what it can be like playing these D&D games where things are decided on a dice roll, and even if you have a 95% chance to hit, you could totally just miss. And even if you have a character in a defensive posture at full health, they can totally get critically hit and just instantly die. Now, it kind of goes both ways. I've had several occasions in the play session of 8 or 10 hours is what I've sunk in so far. I've had several occasions where I've just straight up one-shot an enemy that previously seemed to be a very major threat. It feels very satisfying when that happens to you. Similarly, it's very unfortunate when it's the other way around and one of your characters is on the receiving end of a critical hit. I think it's really added this gravity to the combat, and even though it's a turn-based game and I was really unsure of how I was going to enjoy that kind of gameplay experience, I found myself really liking it because the stakes seem to be so high. If you miss an attack, that could just be followed up with one of your allies getting chopped down, and that's a pretty big deal. Positioning is important, line of sight is important, making sure the odds are in your favor of having the highest chance of success of hitting an enemy, even though it looks to be very slow paced, like, okay, you click on a guy and then you're reading through like 10 different spells trying to decipher which one you want to use. The act of playing it didn't feel boring because I knew the stakes of if I missed an attack, basically, or if I put myself in a bad position. The turn-based combat ended up being a lot more engaging than I expected it to, and still at this point, to 8 to 10 hours in, I'm really enjoying the combat encounters. Like, I genuinely look forward to whenever combat encounters happen. So yeah, I had that first major encounter with that group of bandits. After defeating them, I walk up to the front gate there and I say, hey, could you let me in? I'm totally like, this is legit. And then I fail a ability check, and that's the whole dice roll system where some of the conversations that you have, a dice roll will happen, which basically determines if you succeed or fail in the thing that you're trying to do. And if you fail, you'll get locked out of stuff. I was locked out of going into the dungeon through the main entrance because I could not trick him into believing that I belonged there and that I should be let in. And so that brought me back to finding alternative means, of which apparently there are two. There was this back gate all the way around the corner this little hatch that you could open up and crawl down into this river that went through the ancient ruins. Or there was a giant massive slab of rock right above clearly vulnerable ground that I attacked. And in attacking, the rock dropped. A massive chasm was opened up that led me right into the ruins. So I brought my whole team into these ruins, and just outside, surprise, surprise, was the entire troop of looters that were scouring the ruins. Probably because they heard the rock crashing through and they decided to come to that general area to investigate. So I realized I was in a precarious position, but I didn't want to save scum. I didn't want to just back out. So I opened the door, walk on through, and with the intention of picking up and throwing this barrel of oil towards the enemies, I accidentally attack it, spilling it all over the feet of my mage, putting me in a really dangerous spot. I could have just save scummed at that point. I decided I didn't want to play that way, and instead I made my way out. Fortunately, I still had the movement points to do so. Made my way out and actually ended up turning what seemed to be a situation where I was completely screwed and I was about to instantly lose one of my characters. It turned around and was a huge boon. As the enemies tried to approach me, we lit the oil slick ablaze, and then we just basically decimated them from there. Now, there was a bit of a back and forth. They had some very strong melee characters up in my face that took a bit of work to whittle down. But overall, it was this really interesting experience, and I think it speaks to what seems to be one of the elements that this game looks to shine in, is that individual players can have these very different experiences in specific areas depending on how they approach it. It would have been different if I managed to sneak my way into the front door, or if I went all the way around the ledge to that back hatch. But my experience of going into those ruins by crashing this massive slab of rock and creating this hole and having all of the enemies just grouped up right there next to that oil barrel, that experience was quite different for me. And even more so, it was different because the oil barrel thing didn't go exactly the way I hoped it would, with me accidentally cracking it at my feet instead of throwing it towards the enemies. So these kind of dynamic experiences, these, I guess, emergent gameplay is what you would call it. These emergent elements really put a different twist on what could just, it's not a linear, straightforward game. You and your friend and your friend's friend, we could all go to the same area, but have vastly different experiences there. And I think that's really neat. That seems like it might be one of the strong points of this game. I did that. We took out the bandit camp. I continued to explore through the ruins. There was some nefarious traps that I came across, and I ended up unearthing these ancient skeletons because I went into their sacred room. I think this is really what made me realize the atmosphere in this game is absolutely killer. I'm loving it. Again, I'm not super intimately familiar with Dungeons and Dragons in general. I've dabbled with a few of their games before, like I've played some Neverwinter games, but I didn't play the first two Baldur's Gates, and I don't know much about the history, the lore, the characters, but I gotta say, this game, there's just a very cool atmosphere to it, and I loved going through these very first ruins. It's the first ruins I came across in the game, and I had just a fantastic experience with it. Now, after I came out of there, came across another origin character who was being held captive. I rescued her, she joined my team, and then we made our way towards this massive town in the wilderness, this druid encampment that was under attack by a horde of goblins. We had the high ground. We helped them defend the town by picking them off from the high ground, which was great. All of my characters, even the melee ones, I had bows and arrows on them, so they were able to pick at them and cast some spells and stuff. And we fended off the goblin invasion, made our way into the town, and that's where I wrapped up my day. So again, I've played somewhere between 8 and 10 hours at this point, and in that time, what I've done is I went through the tutorial, I was washed up on the beach, I met Shadowheart, she joined my party, we fought through the crashed ship that I was just on that was now on the beach, we made our way up to the ancient ruins, fought off the bandits, went into the ruins, fought the bandits there, walked around, discovering some mysteries, picking up some loot, unearthing these ancient skeletons, saved another origin character, had her join my party, we fought the goblins that were attacking the town, and then we went into the town. That whole arc that I just laid out was that 8 to 10 hour period. I could check Steam. How long did I play? Okay, 9 hours. So that whole arc was 9 hours of playtime. I feel like I've barely seen anything, but I've played 9 hours. And it seems like there's a lot more to this first act than what I've uncovered up at this point. And I feel like I'm gonna blow past that 20-hour mark that they said it is. And not only does that have to do with, you know, all of the exploring and things to discover and objects to interact with, the world and these characters and the voice acting, it's just been stellar so far. I haven't wanted to skip a single cutscene. I haven't blown through any of the dialogue, and I guess that's worth mentioning. All of the dialogue that you have with these NPCs is fully voice acted, at least with the character you're speaking with. Not every line that your character is saying has dialogue to it, but everything that NPCs say in the game, from random NPCs you encounter in the wilderness, NPCs in the druid town that I'm in now, especially all of the origin characters, there's quite a bit of dialogue there, and you will always have like somewhere between 4 and 6 options of things that you say to them, and that will take you through these branching trees of dialogue, whether it be about their personal characters, the events that are going on with all of your character and all of the origin characters having to deal with the mind flayer tadpole in their brains, or just the NPCs in the town and the events that are going on surrounding them, being concerned with the goblin attacks and the goblins in the surrounding wilderness, how they're going to get to Baldur's Gate. There's all this interpersonal strife and conflict with all of these town members that I've seen already. In fact, the last hour and a half that I played was just talking to NPCs and working through all of their stories and all the shit that they've got going on and all of their concerns and stuff. They've done a really, really great job with the storytelling and the narrative and the world building here. And then I think it's also worth mentioning that there's so much world interaction. You know, if you've played Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, you've got a lot of the same stuff. Like, you can pick up and move crates and barrels. Most things that seem physically possible to pick up, unless it's like a massive boulder, you can pick up and throw some distance. Sometimes this will be functionally useful, like you can climb onto things, give yourself these extra staircases. Other times you can use it to set up traps or just do it for fun. There'll be like candelabras and torches that you can light in the environment. There'll be different chests and stuff for you to open. There'll just be items that are just straight up on a table or on the ground that you can walk up to, interact with, pick up, and all of that stuff. Lots of world interaction, really cool environments so far. I loved that for those first ancient ruins and that dungeon that was underneath it. And I really like this first major encampment and town that I've gone to at the moment. So just to wrap it up with some final thoughts, I gotta say, I'm loving what I've seen so far. You know, I normally don't care or have the patience for the heavy narrative stuff, but I really like it here. And I didn't think I would like the turn-based combat, but because there's so much weight to it and interacting with all of these D&D systems that I'm really kind of just learning about and figuring out for the first time, it's made the fights feel really engaging because there's so much gravity to everything that you do. The atmosphere, the world building, the setting, just everything. I think it's been great so far. We're still in the honeymoon period. This is just after playing one day. Keep in mind, it's an early access game still. It's fully priced at $60. It's not finished. There are still bugs. I did have one hard crash. It was by and large stable, but I did have one hard crash and a few glitchy moments, like there was one explosive barrel that was visibly there in the environment, but I couldn't interact with it, so that was a little bit weird. But overall, it's been great. I am loving it, and yeah, that's it. Those are my final thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to continue to play this game. I'm streaming it as well on my Twitch channel. If you guys want to watch me play live, you can check it out there. But beyond that, after I see everything there is to see, I'll probably do a kind of more in-depth review of sorts of where the game is at the moment in early access, what I like, what I dislike, and what I hope that they add in the future. That's it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm going to go play some more Baldur's Gate. All right, I'll see you later.